Stop the doctors. I shouted, my voice shaking the walls. I begged them to take my blood to save my boy. But the doctor just looked at me with pity. He said it was impossible, that my wife and I were both type O but my son was type A. In that instant my life fell apart. Because it meant I was not his father. Everything I thought I knew was a lie. Let me tell you how a man's entire world can crumble in the space of a single sentence. How love can transform into something so dark, so consuming, that it rewrites the very essence of who you are. This is my confession, my truth, and perhaps my warning to anyone who believes they know the depths of human betrayal. My name doesn't matter anymore. What matters is what I was and what I became. I was Michael Harrison, a man who thought he understood love. I thought I understood loyalty. I thought I understood family. For 8 years, I lived in what I believed was paradise. My wife Sarah was my college sweetheart, the woman who made me believe in forever. She had this laugh that could pull me out of any dark mood, these green eyes that seemed to hold all the secrets of happiness. When she smiled at me across our breakfast table each morning, I felt like the luckiest man alive. And then there was my son. God, my son. Jacob. Jake. The boy who called me daddy with such pure trust, complete faith. He was 7 years old when everything changed, 7 years of bedtime stories, scraped knees I bandaged, soccer games where I cheered louder than any other parent. 7 years of him falling asleep on my chest during movie nights, of me teaching him to ride his bike, of him running into my arms every day when I came home from work. He was my purpose, my legacy, my heart walking around outside my body. I worked 60-hour weeks at the architectural firm, not because I loved the job but because I loved providing for them. Every blueprint I drew, every client I courted, every late night I spent perfecting designs, it was all for them. For the house we'd bought in the suburbs with the big backyard where Jake could play. For Sarah's art supplies because she'd given up her career to raise our son. For Jake's baseball equipment, his piano lessons, his college fund that I contributed to religiously every month. My best friend Marcus was part of this perfect picture. We'd been roommates in college, best man at each other's weddings, the kind of friends who knew each other's deepest secrets. Or so I thought. Marcus was the fun uncle to Jake, the guy who showed up with surprise gifts and took us out to dinner. Sarah loved him like a brother. I trusted him with my life, with my family, with everything that mattered to me. The three of us, sometimes four when Marcus brought a date, would spend weekends together. Barbecues in the backyard, trips to the beach, holidays that felt like scenes from a perfect family movie. I have photographs from those times, hundreds of them, and in every single one we're smiling. Real smiles, genuine happiness, or what I thought was genuine happiness. Now I look at those photos and see the lie written in every gesture, every glance between Sarah and Marcus that I was too blind, too trusting, too stupid to recognize. But that day in the hospital changed everything. Jake had been feeling weak for weeks. Sarah kept saying it was just a growth spurt, that he needed more rest, more vitamins. But a mother's intuition proved right when Jake collapsed during recess at school. The nurse called, her voice tight with worry, and I left work immediately. Sarah met me at the emergency room, her face pale, her hands shaking. The tests revealed that Jake had severe anemia. His blood count was dangerously low. The doctor, a kind man with gray hair and gentle eyes, explained that Jake would need a blood transfusion immediately. Without hesitation, I rolled up my sleeve. I was type O universal donor and I'd given blood before. This was my son, my baby, and I would give him everything I had. That's when the doctor delivered the words that destroyed me. Sarah and I were both type O. Jake was type A, genetically impossible. The room started spinning. Sarah's face went white as paper. The doctor, realizing what he'd just revealed, began stammering apologies, but I couldn't hear him anymore. All I could hear was the sound of my own heart breaking, the sound of 8 years of love and trust shattering like glass hitting concrete. Sarah tried to explain, tried to lie even then. She stammered about rare genetic conditions, about lab errors, about anything that might make this go away. But I saw the truth in her eyes. The guilt she'd been carrying, the secret that had been eating at her, it all spilled out in that moment of panic. She didn't confess with words that day, but her eyes, those green eyes I'd loved so much, they confessed everything. We saved Jake's life. Marcus showed up at the hospital within an hour, and when they tested his blood, the match was perfect. Type A. The father my son never knew he had, the man who had been living a lie right alongside me for 7 years. 7 years. Jake was 7 years old, which meant Sarah had betrayed me before our son could even walk, before I'd taught him to say, Daddy, before I'd spent thousands of nights checking on him while he slept. The days that followed were a blur of rage, grief, and devastating clarity. Sarah confessed everything, weeping as she told me about the one-night stand that had become something more, about the secret relationship that had lasted months, about the pregnancy she'd hidden from Marcus and tried to pass off as mine. She begged for forgiveness, promised it was over, swore that she loved me more than anything. But her words were meaningless now. Every "I love you" she'd ever said to me was tainted. Every moment of happiness we'd shared was built on a foundation of lies. The worst part wasn't even Sarah's betrayal. It was losing Jake. Oh, he was still my son in every way that mattered. I'd raised him, loved him, shaped him into the remarkable little boy he was. But legally, genetically, he wasn't mine. And as Sarah and Marcus began to have conversations about co-parenting, about Jake needing to know his real father, I felt him slipping away from me. The boy who had been my entire world was now going to be shared with the man who had destroyed my marriage, my family, my faith in everything I thought I knew about love. Marcus tried to talk to me, tried to explain that he never meant for it to happen, that he'd wanted to tell me 1,000 times over the years. He said he'd watched me love Jake and felt guilty every single day. But his guilt meant nothing to me. His remorse was worthless. He had stolen 7 years of honest relationship with his son, 7 years of my life that I'd spent loving a child who biologically belonged to him. He'd sat at my dinner table, laughed at my jokes, accepted my trust and friendship while sleeping with my wife and fathering my child. The divorce proceedings were swift and brutal. Sarah got custody of Jake, of course. She was his mother, and now Marcus was asserting his parental rights. I got weekend visitations, like some distant relative instead of the man who had been Jake's father for 7 years. The house we'd built our life in was sold. Half of everything I'd worked for went to the woman who'd been lying to me since before our son was born. But I moved into a small apartment across town, and every night I sat in the silence, staring at the walls, feeling something dark taking root in my chest. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was something colder, more calculating. It was the slow, steady burn of a man who had been completely destroyed and was ready to do some destroying of his own. I began to plan. Not impulsively, not in the heat of rage, but with the methodical precision I'd once applied to architectural designs. I studied Sarah and Marcus, learned their routines, their weaknesses, their fears. I discovered that Marcus had been lying to his own family about Jake's existence. His parents, devout Catholics who disapproved of affairs, had no idea they had a grandson. His ex-wife, who he'd claimed was infertile during their marriage, would be devastated to learn he'd had a child with another woman. Sarah, meanwhile, was trying to rebuild her life with Marcus, trying to create the family she'd apparently always wanted. She was working again, her art finally getting some recognition at local galleries. She was happy, or trying to be, building a new life on the ashes of our marriage. Marcus had moved in with her and Jake, playing house in a rented place across town while they waited for their own fresh start. I spent months gathering information. I hired a private investigator to dig into Marcus's business dealings and discovered some creative bookkeeping that his corporate clients wouldn't appreciate. I learned about Sarah's art sales, about the small lies she'd been telling about our marriage to make herself look less culpable to friends and family. I collected evidence, documentation, photographs, recordings. I built a case not for court, but for complete destruction. The beauty of revenge, I discovered, is in the patience, the waiting, the watching, the slow, careful construction of someone's downfall while they live their life completely unaware of what's coming. Every day I got up, went to work, maintained the facade of a man healing from divorce. But every night I refined my plans, added new elements, found new pressure points to exploit. I started small. Anonymous tips to Marcus's clients about his questionable billing practices. Casual mentions to mutual friends about inconsistencies in Sarah's story about our divorce. Seeds of doubt, planted carefully and allowed to grow naturally. I watched as Marcus began to struggle at work, as clients started asking harder questions about his invoices. I watched as Sarah's friendships began to strain under the weight of whispered doubts about her character. But these were just preliminaries. The real revenge required something more profound, more personal. I needed to destroy not just their reputations or their careers, but the very foundation of what they were building together. I needed to take from them what they had taken from me, the ability to trust, to believe in love, to feel secure in their family. The opportunity came when Jake started asking questions. He was 8 now, old enough to understand that something fundamental had changed in his world. He asked me during one of our weekend visits why he looked more like Uncle Marcus than like me. Children see things adults try to hide, and Jake had started to piece together the truth on his own. I made a decision that I knew would hurt him but would devastate them. Instead of lying or deflecting as Sarah and Marcus had been doing, I told Jake the truth. Age-appropriately, gently but honestly. I explained that sometimes adults make mistakes, that his mommy and Uncle Marcus had fallen in love before he was born, and that Marcus was actually his biological father. I told him that I would always be his daddy in my heart, but that he had another father too. Jake's reaction was everything I'd hoped for and everything I'd feared. Confusion, hurt, anger at being lied to for so long. He demanded to know why everyone had been pretending, why no one had told him the truth. When Sarah came to pick him up that Sunday, he confronted her with questions she wasn't ready to answer, accusations that cut her to the core. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. Jake, feeling betrayed by the adults he trusted most, became withdrawn and angry. He started acting out at school, getting into fights, refusing to listen to Sarah or Marcus. The stable, happy child they were trying to raise became a hurt, confused little boy who didn't know who to trust or what to believe. Sarah called me, screaming, crying, begging me to explain to Jake that I'd been wrong, that it was all a misunderstanding. But the truth was out now and there was no putting it back. Marcus tried to be the reasonable one, suggested family therapy, mediation, anything to help Jake adjust to the new reality. But Jake didn't want therapy. He wanted answers, honesty, and time to process the fact that his entire life had been built on lies. I watched from a distance as their perfect little family imploded. Sarah, racked with guilt and dealing with Jake's behavioral problems, began drinking more heavily. Marcus, trying to be a father to a child who resented him, started staying late at work to avoid the chaos at home. Their relationship, built on stolen moments and hidden passion, couldn't withstand the pressure of actual parenthood and the consequences of their choices. But I wasn't done. The private investigator had uncovered Marcus's biggest secret. He had another child, a daughter from a brief relationship in college that he'd never acknowledged or supported. The girl was now 15, raised by her mother who'd spent years trying to get Marcus to take responsibility. I made sure this information found its way to Sarah, along with documentation of the unpaid child support and Marcus's repeated denials of paternity. Sarah confronted Marcus about his other child, about his pattern of abandoning responsibility when it became inconvenient. The man she thought she knew, the man she'd destroyed her marriage for, turned out to have his own history of lies and betrayal. Their fights became legendary among the neighbors, screaming matches that ended with doors slamming and Marcus storming out. Meanwhile, I made sure Marcus's parents learned about Jake through a carefully orchestrated, accidental meeting at the grocery store. His mother, a woman I'd met at several dinner parties years earlier, was devastated to learn she had a grandson she'd never known about, and furious that Marcus had hidden this from her. His father, a strict man who'd raised Marcus to value integrity and honesty, threatened to disown his son for the web of lies he'd been living. The final blow came when I arranged for Marcus's ex-wife to learn about Jake. She'd spent years believing she was the reason their marriage had failed, that her inability to have children had driven Marcus away. Learning that he'd had a child with another woman while they were still married, and had hidden it for years, sent her into a rage that culminated in a very public confrontation at Marcus's office. Within 6 months, Marcus had lost his job, been cut off by his family, and was facing lawsuits from both his ex-wife and the mother of his teenage daughter. Sarah, dealing with Jake's ongoing behavioral issues and Marcus's complete financial and emotional meltdown, began to realize that the man she'd chosen over me wasn't the stable, loving partner she'd thought he was. But the most devastating revenge was watching what happened to Jake. The happy, confident boy I'd raised had become withdrawn and angry. He was struggling in school, had no close friends, and spent most of his time alone in his room. The adults in his life, so focused on their own drama and pain, had failed to protect him from the consequences of their choices. He was the innocent victim of all our lies and schemes, and seeing him suffer was both my greatest victory and my deepest regret. Sarah tried to reconcile with me, showing up at my apartment late one night, drunk and desperate. She begged me to help her fix things, to help Jake, to somehow put our family back together. She confessed that she'd made the biggest mistake of her life, that she'd never stopped loving me, that Marcus had been a fantasy that turned into a nightmare. But looking at her, I felt nothing. The love I'd once felt for this woman had been completely consumed by the fire of my revenge. I told her it was too late, that she'd made her choice and would have to live with the consequences. I told her that Jake would always suffer because of what she'd done, and that no amount of regret could undo the damage. I watched her break down completely, sobbing in my doorway, begging for a forgiveness I no longer had the capacity to give. Marcus tried a different approach. He came to my office, looking haggard and desperate, and offered me money to stop whatever I was doing to destroy his life. He knew somehow that his downfall wasn't coincidental, that I was orchestrating his destruction. But he couldn't prove it, and I told him exactly that. I told him that sometimes bad choices just catch up with people, that the universe has a way of balancing the scales. I told him that he'd stolen 7 years of my son's life from me, and that I was just returning the favor. The revenge I'd planned so carefully had worked beyond my wildest dreams. Sarah was alone, drinking heavily, barely able to care for Jake properly. Marcus was broke, isolated from his family, and facing years of legal battles. Their relationship had disintegrated under the weight of revealed secrets and external pressures. Both of them were suffering in ways that mirrored my own pain, experiencing the devastation of having their lives built on lies completely collapse. But as I sat in my empty apartment watching the news coverage of Marcus's very public legal troubles, I realized something I hadn't expected. The revenge I'd worked so hard to achieve felt hollow. Destroying them hadn't healed me. Watching them suffer hadn't brought back the happiness I'd lost. All it had done was create more pain, more broken lives, more damaged people. And Jake, sweet, innocent Jake, was the one paying the highest price for all our adult failures. His grades had plummeted. He'd been suspended twice for fighting. Sarah had to put him in therapy, and the therapist told her that Jake was showing signs of severe trust issues and depression. The boy who used to run into my arms with pure joy now barely spoke during our weekend visits, sitting quietly while I tried desperately to connect with him. I began to realize that my revenge had made me into someone I didn't recognize. The loving father and husband I'd once been had been replaced by a calculating, cold man capable of destroying lives without remorse. I'd won my war against Sarah and Marcus, but in doing so, I'd lost myself completely. The capacity for love, joy, and trust that had once defined me was gone, burned away in the fires of my own hatred. One night, about a year after my revenge had reached its crescendo, Jake asked me a question that broke my heart completely. He looked at me with eyes that seemed too old for his 9-year-old face and asked, "Daddy, why is everyone so sad all the time? Why can't we just be happy again?" I realized in that moment that my son, because he would always be my son regardless of biology, was asking me to be the adult, to be the one who broke the cycle of pain and revenge that was destroying all of us. He was asking me to choose love over hatred, healing over revenge, hope over despair. But I didn't know how anymore. The man who could have made that choice, the man who had loved unconditionally and trusted completely, was gone. In his place was someone harder, colder, more strategic. Someone who had achieved the perfect revenge but had lost everything that made life worth living in the process. Sarah eventually lost custody of Jake to the state when her drinking became too severe and Marcus proved unable to provide stable care. Jake was placed with Sarah's sister, a good woman who tried her best but couldn't undo the damage that had been done. I got expanded visitation rights, but the boy who visited me wasn't the son I remembered. He was guarded, careful, slow to trust, and quick to assume that the adults in his life would let him down. Marcus disappeared from our lives entirely, unable to cope with the destruction of everything he'd built. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd moved across the country, started over with a new name and a new life. Sarah got sober eventually, but she was a different person, worn down by guilt and loss and the knowledge that her choices had destroyed not just her own life but the life of her child. As for me, I continued living, but I'm not sure I'd call it a life. I went to work, paid my bills, visited with Jake when I could, but the spark that had once driven me was extinguished. The architect who used to design buildings full of hope and possibility was replaced by someone going through the motions, creating functional but soulless structures. The revenge I'd orchestrated was complete, thorough, and devastating. I'd destroyed the lives of the people who had betrayed me, made them pay for their lies and deception in ways they never could have imagined. But in achieving that revenge, I'd also destroyed myself. The love I'd once felt for Sarah, the trust I'd once placed in Marcus, the joy I'd once found in being Jake's father, all of it was gone, consumed by the need to make them suffer as I had suffered. People ask me sometimes if it was worth it, if the revenge gave me the satisfaction I was looking for. The answer is complicated. Yes, I got the justice I felt I deserved. Yes, they paid a price for their betrayal. But the cost was higher than I ever imagined. In destroying them, I destroyed the man I used to be, the capacity for happiness I once had, the future I might have built. Jake is 13 now, and when I look at him, I see a boy who has learned too early that adults can't always be trusted, that love doesn't always last, that families can be built on lies and destroyed by truth. I see a child who has been shaped by the war between his parents and their partners, molded by conflicts he never should have witnessed, scarred by choices he had no part in making. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder what would have happened if I'd chosen differently. If I'd focused on healing instead of revenge, on building a new life instead of destroying the old one. If I'd put Jake's needs ahead of my own need for justice. If I'd found a way to forgive, not for Sarah's sake or Marcus's sake, but for my own. But those are questions without answers, paths not taken, possibilities that exist only in the realm of regret. The choices I made were made from a place of profound pain and betrayal, and while I understand them, I can't undo them. The revenge I planned so carefully achieved exactly what I intended it to achieve. The problem was that what I thought I wanted turned out to be hollow, empty, incapable of filling the void left by love's betrayal. So this is my confession, my warning, my story of how revenge consumed everything good in my life while giving me exactly what I thought I wanted. I got justice, but I lost joy. I got retribution, but I lost redemption. I got revenge, but I lost myself. The blood test that revealed Jake wasn't my biological son destroyed one version of my life. But the revenge I chose in response destroyed everything else. Sometimes I wonder if the real tragedy isn't the betrayal I suffered, but the man I became in response to it. The man who chose darkness over light, hatred over healing, revenge over redemption. And now, as I sit in this small apartment, older and lonelier than I ever imagined I could be, I finally understand the true cost of revenge. It's not just what it does to your enemies, it's what it does to you. And by the time you realize that cost, it's already too late to pay it back.